The guns roar back to life as if punishing Henry for hesitating. Shrapnel hisses through the air, grenades pound the ground, and soldiers scream orders over the deafening chaos. Henry throws himself forward, dragging a wounded comrade behind a fallen wall, firing back at enemy silhouettes dancing through the smoke. The war doesn't pause for mercy. It devours everything, even the moments that should matter. His regiment pushes ahead, battered but unbroken, and Henry earns yet another mark of bravery on a day that seems designed to crush him. The battle drags on for hours, blurred flashes of fire, mud swallowing boots, and men fighting as though the world depends on every step. By nightfall, Marcoing is silent again, the kind of silence that feels wrong, too heavy, too full of ghosts. Henry sits against a cracked stone wall, lungs burning, hand shaking, replaying the moment he spared the wounded enemy. Why? He can't answer. Something in the soldier's eyes. Fear? Exhaustion? Humanity? Had stirred a piece of Henry that war hadn't yet destroyed. He pushes the thought aside, telling himself it was just another man, one more soul trying to survive a nightmare. Europe soon exhales the fragile promise of peace. The war ends. Men return home. Life tries to begin again. But Henry's act of mercy becomes a rumor, then a story, then a legend. And decades later, long after Henry has aged into a gentle, quiet man who tends his garden and avoids speaking about the horrors he witnessed, a message reaches him. Adolf Hitler, now the leader of Nazi Germany, claims that he remembers being spared on a battlefield in 1918 by a British soldier who had him squarely in his sights, yet chose to lower his rifle. Neville Chamberlain himself tells Henry this during a visit, describing how Hitler pointed to a painting of Marcoing and said, "That man came so near to killing me." Henry's heart sinks, his hands shake, he feels the world tilt beneath his feet, because suddenly the weight of one compassionate moment crashes back into him, heavier than any shell he survived. Had he spared not just a soldier, but the architect of a future catastrophe? The question will haunt him for the rest of his life. The story begins in the dying months of World War I, inside a world that looks more like a graveyard than a battlefield. Black smoke crawls across the sky, artillery thunders like an angry god, and the ground trembles with every explosion as if the earth itself wants to swallow the conflict whole. This is 1918 France, a place where boys become old men overnight and survival is a miracle bought with mud, blood, and luck. Moving through this hellscape is a young British private named Henry Tandy, a soldier whose courage is spoken of in whispers because bravery has become rarer than sunlight in the trenches. His uniform is torn, his face streaked with grime, and his hands carry the memory of 1,000 impossible choices. But he keeps going, steady, focused, determined. Not because he believes war makes heroes, but because he refuses to let the men beside him die alone. His regiment pushes through the shattered village of Marcoing, stepping over broken bricks, shattered glass, and the eerie silence of homes that once held families. Somewhere in this chaos, Henry's instincts sharpen, sensing a danger that hasn't yet revealed itself. Machine guns erupt, bullets crack past him, flames leap from blown-out windows, and the world becomes a storm of noise and panic. And then, amid the smoke, movement. Slow, unsteady, wounded. A lone German soldier emerges, limping forward with hands barely raised, his face smeared with dirt, but his eyes sharp, alive, watchful. Henry raises his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger. One pull, one blast, one dead enemy. It should be simple. It should be automatic. But something stops him. A strange, unsettling stillness. For a brief moment, the battlefield quiets around them. Two men, two enemies, standing in a fading war that has consumed millions,
and yet the only sound is their breathing. Henry lowers his weapon. Mercy, instinct, fate, nobody will ever know what guided his hand. The German soldier hesitates, gives a small nod of thanks or shock, no one can tell, and then disappears into the fog. At that moment, neither man has any idea that this fleeting encounter, this tiny act of mercy in a world drowning in cruelty, will one day be whispered as the decision that altered the future of the world.
Decades before Henry Tandy learns the truth, the world transforms in ways he could never have imagined. The armistice ends the fighting, but not the scars. Europe tries to rebuild itself from ashes and emptiness, but beneath the surface, bitterness brews like a storm waiting for its moment. Meanwhile, the wounded German soldier Henry spared limps back to his unit, surviving the final collapse of the Imperial Army. That soldier, years later, will reinvent himself, first as a failed artist, then as a political agitator, then as a mesmerizing orator who feeds on anger, humiliation, and desperation. As the 1920s decay into the 1930s, the soldier Henry let go becomes the face of a rising fury in Germany. His voice grows louder, his rallies swell with rabid energy. His promises sound like salvation to a nation struggling to breathe. His name, Adolf Hitler, begins to echo through Europe with a combination of dread and disbelief. And in some quiet English town, Henry Tandy lives unaware that the man he once allowed to walk away from death is shaping the future like a sculptor twisting iron with his bare hands. Henry builds a simple life. He finds work, settles into routine, and tries to forget the trauma that visits him in nightmares. He never talks about the soldier he spared. It was just one moment in a lifetime of war. But fate has a cruel way of circling back. When Hitler rises to power in 1933, newspapers across Britain publish his face. Henry glances at the pictures like anyone else, recognizing nothing, connecting nothing. Why would he? Millions of German soldiers fought in that war. Millions survived. But then Hitler begins invading, annexing, threatening. Europe trembles, Britain grows anxious, and one day a story emerges that feels impossible. Hitler reportedly keeps a painting of the Marcoing battle in his residence, a painting that features Henry Tandy himself carrying a wounded comrade. Chamberlain sees it, Hitler points at it, and whispers, "That man once spared my life." The rumor spreads like wildfire. Journalists try to confirm it. Veterans dig through records. Historians argue. But in Henry's quiet home, far from political offices and military clocks, the truth hits with a weight he cannot escape. Memories he thought buried claw their way back. The limping soldier, the haunted eyes, the nod in the fog, a moment he forgot, but a moment Hitler never did. And suddenly, Henry realizes he may have unknowingly held the future in his hands and let it walk away.
Henry sits in stunned silence the night he hears the claim from Chamberlain himself. His hands tremble on the newspaper, his breath turns shallow. His wife sees the color drain from his face, but cannot comprehend the storm inside him. Henry feels as though the walls of the room are closing in, as if the very air has become heavier. Every second stretches into an eternity as he tries to piece together a memory from a lifetime ago. He sees the ruined village, the limping soldier, the smoke swirling around them. The eyes he never forgot, sharp, hungry, burning with something dark even beneath exhaustion. The more Henry tries to dismiss it as a mistake or exaggeration, the more his mind betrays him with flashes of that moment. And now, years later, That spared soldier commands armies, invades nations, destroys families, and drags the world into a war that dwarfs the horrors Henry once thought were unbeatable. Henry is not a man given to dramatic emotions. Soldiers learn to swallow their grief. But this is different. It gnaws at him. It poisons his peace. The idea that he allowed a future tyrant to live becomes a shadow that never leaves his side. He stops sleeping. He avoids conversations about the war. He refuses interviews. But the world will not leave him alone. Newspapers want the story. Politicians want confirmation. Veterans want to know if it's true. And the British public wants to understand how a moment of compassion could spiral into such devastating consequence. Henry doesn't give them the satisfaction. He rarely speaks about it publicly, choosing instead to wrestle with it in private, where nobody can see the toll it takes. Friends say he becomes more withdrawn, quieter, as if carrying a burden too heavy to share. They say he ages faster during the Second World War than most men do in a lifetime. And perhaps the cruelest cut, Henry had always believed that mercy was the highest form of courage. But now he wonders if fate took that courage and twisted it into tragedy. He wonders if his act of humanity allowed the world's darkest chapter to unfold. The guilt becomes a relentless companion, and as Hitler's armies tear across Europe, Henry Tandy, once a hero, now fears that the single moment he chose mercy over instinct may have been the moment that changed the world forever, and not for the better.
As the Second World War erupts across Europe, Henry Tandy watches the newsreels with a hollow ache in his chest, a feeling that intensifies with every city bombed, every country invaded, every refugee fleeing into the night. The radio crackles with updates of battles raging across Poland, France, and the Low Countries, and each headline feels like a personal indictment, a reminder of the man he let walk away on that foggy night in 1918. He sees Hitler's speeches replayed in British cinemas, the frenzy, the shouting, the crowds roaring back at him with terrifying devotion. In those moments, Henry feels as though the world is being consumed by a fire he helped spark with a single act of mercy. He tries to convince himself it's impossible, that countless soldiers were spared on the battlefield, that memory plays cruel tricks. Yet every time Hitler's piercing stare flashes across the screen, Henry remembers the exact same eyes looking at him through the haze of Marcoing. Eyes full of exhaustion, pride, and something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Britain braces for war. Young men volunteer or are conscripted, marching off to fight a tyrant they barely understand. And the irony tears at Henry. He once fought to end all wars, yet here stands another conflict, greater and more monstrous than anything he and his comrades could have ever imagined. He attends remembrance ceremonies quietly, unnoticed, his medals worn modestly on his chest. Strangers shake his hand, veterans salute him, but Henry feels none of the pride he once carried. Instead, he feels the crushing, suffocating weight of destiny, as though he has become an unwilling thread between two world wars, one act linking them in ways history books will never fully capture. He begins avoiding crowds, social gatherings, even close friends. The guilt shapes itself into a silent companion that never leaves his side. And as the Blitz lights London on fire, and British soldiers fight for survival in North Africa and the skies above Europe, Henry imagines the wounded soldier he spared standing in a bunker far away, making decisions that reshape the world in blood and steel. Henry wonders if he should have fired that day, if the fate of millions might have changed. But the hardest question of all
is one he never voices aloud. How can a man forgive himself for saving someone who destroyed so much?
Years pass and the war grinds forward with a brutality that feels endless. Hitler's armies spread across Europe, consuming nations, crushing resistance, and leaving trails of devastation that mirror the nightmares Henry has carried since his youth. But amid the shattered cities and the fading hope, whispers begin to reach him. Rumors exchanged among soldiers, spoken softly in pubs and passed from widow to widow, that Henry Tandy, the most decorated private soldier of the First World War, might have unknowingly spared the man responsible for this second global cataclysm. Some treat it like a ghost story, others treat it like prophecy, a few treat it like accusation. Henry tries to ignore the murmurs, but guilt has already planted its roots deep in his heart. He reads every newspaper article that traces Hitler's early years, searching for any detail, any evidence that it wasn't him. The dates, the locations, the regiment's movements, the injuries, they almost align too perfectly. Almost. But war memories blur, twist, overlap, and sometimes lie. Was it truly Hitler he spared? Or did Hitler invent the story to manipulate Chamberlain, to flatter a foreign leader he aimed to deceive? Henry cannot know. The uncertainty becomes torture. Meanwhile, as Allied planes thunder overhead and news of concentration camps slowly reaches Britain, Henry's soul fractures further. Never in his darkest moments could he have imagined the scale of the atrocities now being revealed. The idea that he may have saved the architect behind them becomes a nightmare that claws at him every waking hour. Friends encourage him to dismiss it. You don't know it was him, Henry. No one can say for sure. But Henry carries the memory too clearly. Every detail of that moment resurfaces unbidden. The smoke curling through the village, the limp of the soldier, the unmistakable intensity in his eyes, and the nod, brief, cold, unforgettable. He begins to see that moment in his dreams, replaying on an endless loop. Sometimes he fires the shot, sometimes he doesn't. Each version ends differently, but each version leaves him waking in a cold sweat. When Hitler finally falls, cornered in a bunker beneath a burning Berlin, Henry feels no relief, no triumph, only a quiet, profound grief. Because regardless of whether the story is fact or myth, Henry Tandy has lived 2 wars with the belief that one bullet, one decision, might have rewritten history. And no medal, no honor, no comforting words from others will ever lighten the shadow that moment cast over his life.
After the war ends, Europe exhales a long, broken sigh. But peace does not return to Henry Tandy's heart. The guns may fall silent, the dictators may fall, but some battles never stop echoing inside the mind. Henry becomes an old man in a world reborn from ashes, a world where children play in streets that once hosted tanks, where newspapers celebrate victory while quietly burying the horrors uncovered in ruined camps. People begin to forget, but Henry remembers everything. He lives in a small house, the kind where the ticking of the clock feels louder than life outside. His medals rest in a drawer instead of on display. He cannot bear to look at them. They remind him of bravery, honor, sacrifice, values he still believes in, yet feels he betrayed when he spared that wounded soldier. Reporters occasionally knock on his door, seeking to revive the old tale. "Mr. Tandy, did you really spare Adolf Hitler?" Henry rarely answers. Sometimes he closes the door gently. Sometimes he doesn't open it at all. A few journalists, more persistent than polite, shout through the mail slot or leave their questions scribbled on letters. Henry burns the letters. He refuses to let the world turn his regret into entertainment. Yet alone, in the quiet hours past midnight, the ghosts return. He replays the events of Marcoing again and again, the limp, the fog, the split-second decision that felt harmless at the time. He remembers thinking the German soldier was just a boy trying to survive a collapsing empire, no different from countless others. Henry never imagined that boy would grow into a tyrant who would plunge the world into darkness. Some friends try to comfort him, telling him there is no proof, that memories deceive, that Hitler may have invented the story to appear almost chosen by fate. Henry listens, nods, but inside he knows the truth, or at least believes he does. Not because of evidence, but because of the look in the soldier's eyes. He has seen thousands of faces in war, but only one pair of eyes ever haunted him so consistently, so violently, so precisely. And as Henry grows older, his body weakening while his mind keeps replaying the decision he cannot undo, the weight of that recognition becomes heavier than any battlefield wound he ever carried.
With the passing years, Henry becomes a symbol without wanting to be one. Veterans honor him for his bravery in World War I. Younger generations treat him as a historical curiosity, the soldier who might have spared Hitler. Some speak of the moment as a tragedy. Others call it destiny. A few even claim it was proof of fate's cruel sense of irony. But Henry never sees it that way. For him, the story is deeply personal, not philosophical. It is not a legend. It is a wound that never healed. When people ask him why he spared the soldier, he struggles for an answer. He did not act out of sympathy for the enemy or hesitation in battle. He acted out of instinct, the instinct that separates humans from monsters, the instinct to show mercy when brutality becomes the norm. That instinct, he believes, betrayed him. Henry feels trapped between two worlds, one that praises him for compassion, and another that blames him for a global nightmare. He belongs fully to neither. Toward the end of his life, he visits the graves of his fallen comrades, men who died long before Hitler ever gained power. At each grave, he whispers apologies. Apologies for surviving when so many didn't. Apologies for mercy in a moment when ruthlessness might have saved millions. Apologies for carrying a burden none of them lived to see. But the dead do not answer. Henry understands that the truth of his encounter may forever remain uncertain. Historians debate it. Some deny it entirely. Others insist it fits. The documents are incomplete. The testimonies conflict. The timeline is foggy, like the battlefield itself. But history's uncertainty is no comfort to Henry. In his heart, he believes it was him. He believes he let Hitler live. And in his quietest moments, when the world outside fades, and the only light in the room is a flickering lamp, Henry whispers a sentence that carries the weight of 2 world wars. If I had known who he would become, I would have fired. It is not anger that drives the words. It is sorrow. Deep, endless sorrow for a world that paid the price for his smallest act of mercy. As Henry enters the final chapter of his life, the world around him keeps moving forward, leaving the shadows of war behind. Children play in fields where artillery once thundered. Trains run smoothly through landscapes that once held trenches and barbed wire. Nations rebuild,
Economies recover, and people begin to treat World War II like a story from another age. But inside Henry, time does not pass so easily. His memories sharpen as his body weakens, and he finds himself drifting back to that day in Marcoing more often than he ever wanted. The battlefield appears in his mind with unsettling clarity. The demolished houses, the bitter smell of smoke, the tremble of the ground beneath falling shells, and that lone figure stumbling through the fog. He wonders whether he truly sensed danger in that moment, whether something deep within him tried to warn him, or whether fate simply played a cruel trick on a tired young soldier who was trying to protect his soul from becoming as cold as the war around him. Henry receives letters from historians, students, and curious strangers asking him to confirm or deny the legendary story. He answers almost none of them. The truth, he believes, belongs to him and him alone. And even if the world insists on knowing, they will never understand what it feels like to carry such a burden. To them, it is history. To Henry, it is regret woven into the fabric of his life. On some evenings, when the sky turns the same gray shade as the smoke of the battlefield, Henry sits by his window and speaks softly to the ghost of the man he once spared. "Why didn't I fire?" he whispers. "Why did you look at me like that?" There is no answer. Perhaps there never will be. Yet Henry cannot shake the belief that the soldier recognized something. A chance at survival, a strange twist of destiny, an inexplicable mercy. And in the quiet of those evenings, Henry wonders whether Hitler knew his face instantly during that moment in 1918, and whether he remembered it every time he saw the painting of Marcoing in his residence. The painting haunts Henry more than the memory itself. It feels like proof. Not historical proof, but moral proof, that the encounter mattered deeply to the man he spared. And as Henry's breath grows shallow with age, he begins to accept a bitter truth. Regret is a war that never ends. It keeps fighting even after the guns fall silent, even after the flags come down, even after a lifetime passes.
In his final months, Henry Tandy becomes quieter than ever, withdrawing into a silence that feels heavier than any battlefield fog. Loved ones try to comfort him, reminding him of the lives he saved, the comrades he protected, the bravery that earned him the Victoria Cross. But Henry cannot escape the shadow of the one life he did not take. The world sees him as a hero. Henry sees himself as a man who made one human decision in a moment when humanity was nearly extinct. And he wonders until his last days whether that human decision doomed millions, whether fate used him as a cruel instrument, whether mercy, when shown to the wrong man, can become its own kind of weapon. These questions follow him into every night, into every dream, into every pause between breaths. But if there is any peace for Henry, it comes from one small truth. He did not act out of cowardice or weakness. He acted out of decency, the last fragile piece of humanity he carried into that battlefield. And perhaps, in a world drowning in hatred and violence, that decency was a light worth preserving, even if it cast a long and painful shadow. At Henry's funeral, soldiers, old and young, gather to honor him, unaware of the full depth of the burden he carried. They speak of his courage, his loyalty, his sacrifice. They speak of the battles he fought and the men he saved. They do not speak of Marcoing. They do not mention Hitler. They do not know the silent war that lived inside him long after the real one ended. And maybe that is how Henry would have wanted it. his legacy defined not by regret, but by bravery. The world moves on. History continues to debate the truth, to argue about records, timelines, testimonies. Some claim the story is a myth. Others say it is fact. But the truth lives not in documents. It lives in the tortured heart of a man who believed it his entire life. And in that truth, the story becomes more than a footnote in wartime lore. It becomes a haunting reminder of how fragile fate can be, how 1 second, 1 breath, 1 act of mercy can tilt the world into darkness or save it. Henry Tandy, the soldier who spared a wounded enemy out of compassion, carried the weight of that moment until his final heartbeat. And the world, changed forever by the man he may have let live, continues to whisper his story as one of the most haunting what-ifs in history. A moment so small, yet a consequence so vast that even time itself seems unable to forget it.